Hello, today I'd like to talk to you about two sister openings, rather like the centre game and Danish Gambit. These are the Vienna game and Gambit and Bishop's opening. Bishop's opening is rather interesting, e4, e5, and if you don't like playing against Petrov's defence after knight f3, knight to f6, then some white players have started playing bishop to c4. I mean, again, this is an idea from about 40 years ago, has got a bit popular, and I think is not so frightening these days, and people might prefer to take on the Petrovs. But knight f6, and if d3, knight c6, and if we play knight f3, that's the what we understand from the two knights defence. We know a line against that, although not very exciting. And f4 is an attempt to be original, but is a rather poor version of the King's Gambit, where white's committed to playing this rather passive d3 idea. I mean, you can get a transpose, I suppose, into the King's Gambit declined, but take it, and if bishop takes f4, d5, and if e4, d5, and a line that I know goes takes on f6, takes on c4, takes on g7, takes on f4, and now takes on d3, and queen e7 check, and white doesn't really have a good interposition. Knight e2, bishop takes b2, and black's got nothing to fear in this line at all. So that's after knight f6, d3. If d4 takes on d4, knight f6, and there's a line knight takes e4, queen takes d4, where white gets this massive lead in development. It's called the Urusov Gambit, or some such line. I mean, well, the main line of it is knight f6, knight c3, castles, rook he1, and we've still got most of our pieces queued up on the back rank, and white's already got both rooks blasting down the central file. So this is dangerous for black, although you are a healthy pawn up. But play if you like it. But after knight f3, no need to take on e4. Simply knight to c6, and this is a line that we know from two knights defence. So if you want to learn more, do, but you should already know this. So that's bishop's opening. Knight to c3, and now knight f6, bishop c4, and this is the Vienna game, and quite okay for black, I think, but another idea. White might be hoping to play what's known as the Frankenstein Dracula variation by some people. Knight takes e4, which is a trick that works in the two knights, but not so well here. Queen h5, knight d6, bishop to b3, and rather peculiarly, white seems to want to grab an exchange somehow by playing knight to b5. You can't take it because of the mate on f7, and so white grabs an exchange, but black gets the attack. I mean, why you want to play like that is what I don't know, but bishop to b3 is an attacking line, but bishop to e7, I don't think you should get into that theoretical debate about that complicated line, and I think black's just fine here. It's not, I mean, the knight on d6 isn't pretty, but you can get your pieces sorted. And this is about an equal game. White will lose time taking the pawn on e5, and I think you're fine. So instead of that, though, the knight takes e4 line, try instead, I think, knight to c6, and now obviously we can get into two knights defence territory with knight to f6, and when we should know to take on e4, then that's much more boring, simple line for you to play. d3, bishop to b4 is an idea, and now various tries here I think for white are fairly harmless. Knight ge2 is a line, d5 takes, bishop e6, and now knight e4 is a line, knight 2 g3, castles, queen h5, knight to f4 I think is okay for black, bishop to b3, and I think just castles again if knight e4, bishop e7 is an idea. And lastly, after bishop e6 takes on d5, and f4 is an idea. Castles f5, and I think black's got a couple of ways of trying this one on. f6 probably equalises, but takes on c3 and f6 also. Knight g3, king h8, queen d7, rook a to d8, and in this position I think e4 is unclear with an okay position for black. f6 immediately might be easier, and if knight takes on d5, we can play a check. Bishop retreats, bishop to a5, just thinning the material out, and I think black is equal. After f6, knight g3, bishop f7, dodge the bishop around and try and swap it off. There we go. But bishop to d3, a5, and knight d4, and this is again okay for black, I believe. So that's the variation with bishop to c4. Instead, there are a couple of alternatives on move 3. g3 is an idea here for white, fashionable even longer ago than the 1990s. So white isn't doing much, just develop and play d5, I think. Bishop c5, castles, rook e8, and c6, d5. I don't see any reason to suppose that you're not at least easily equal in this line. I mean, it's still plenty of chess left to play, but it's not a scary line, I think. g3. Lastly, f4. Now this is a much more serious attempt for an advantage. You can try taking the king's gambit, but the Vienna gambit, this is awkward in the same way that the Halloween is awkward. You don't have a decent retreat for the knight, and after knight g8 you're in trouble here, I think. So f4, decline with d5 is the best way to try this. And now e takes d5, and almost anything. E takes f4 gets into lines of the king's gambit, but knight takes e5 is also okay. d5, f takes e5, knight takes e4, and these are the main lines of the Vienna gambit, which I'll just run through fairly quickly. There's a lot of theory on this. Not sure how you're going to get to grips with it all, but it's all in the notes. White can play either knight to f3 or queen to f3. After knight to f3, bishop to c5 is the move. Bishop e7 is equal, but bishop c5 is a bit more combative. And now queen e2 check, takes on c3 check, and bishop to b6. You can try bishop to h4, but bishop to b6, and what White's trying to get his position sorted. h6 and castles, rook d1 is unclear, is one line, and instead of queen e2 we can play for white d4, perhaps a little bit saner, and we'll play for black bishop to b4 in this position, bishop to d2 for white. This is not going well for white, I think. Takes on b4, takes on e3 with all sorts of horrors like g takes f3 check, knight c6 threatened. This is quite a nice way to play for black. If instead queen to d2, knight c6 still, queen to d5, h3, takes on g3 and castles long, and black just has a plus here. This is not a good line for white at all. If instead of knight to f3 then queen to f3 might make more sense, keeping more original lines. I mean, again about equal. Knight c6 and if takes on e4, knight to d4, queen to d3 takes, bishop to f5, and knight takes c2, and you're doing well there. After knight f6, bishop to b5, takes on c3, bishop e7 is about equal, but queen h4 check, queen e4 check, takes on c3, takes on c6, knight e2, and either bishop to a6 or bishop to h3 are both reckoned to be give black a small edge. So those are both good lines. So that's after queen to f3. Instead, queen to e2, knight c6, of course, takes knight d4, or we can get into similar lines that we had before, or that I've just showed you rather. Instead, d3 is the right move and the main lines. There's a sort of a dull line, easily equal. Knight takes c3 and d4. Perhaps a surprising move, but we don't want to let white play d4 and get sort of a big centre against us. Although perhaps bishop e7 letting them do so is equal again. So d4 is quite the right move. Knight f3, now knight c6 is equal, or d takes c6, bishop e2, knight c6, or bishop e7 is another move. Knight c6 castles, knight d4, and now white can try and wriggle a bit. Knight g5, castles, bishop e6, and bishop e7 is equal. After takes on c3, and now either queen d7 or f6 are equal, I think, here. Instead, after d3 by white, bishop b4 is a sharp alternative, with the idea that d takes h4 check, and white will play not g3 because of check on h4, but king e2, and now takes on c3, takes on c3, bishop g4 check, knight f3, d takes e4, so we're getting our piece back, queen to d4, and now, because we don't want to swap too much, bishop h5. And now there's a couple of lines that are great, like king d2, queen g4, queen h g4 check, f4 check, queen g3, takes f3 finally, and knight d7, which is great and a small advantage for black. But I'm sorry to say white can get an equal game or even a forced draw by playing one of the alternatives. King e3 takes on f3, and now bishop b5 check, takes on g3, takes, knight d7, and this is equal because of the extra protection afforded by the centralised king, which looks rather odd but is okay. And if instead, after bishop takes f3, g takes f3, and now queen e1 check, king h4, queen h4 check, and this is a forced draw, king e3, there's no way of continuing the attack, and no reason to swap off. So that's a rather unexciting end to a rather exciting piece of analysis in the Vienna Gambit.